Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Alternative Parties friends, we have another set of exciting guests like we always have on this podcast. They're going to talk about exciting electoral reform activities they've been doing and stuff along those lines. So we have two guests today. One is Edie and the other one is John. So welcome to the podcast, John and Edie.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch. Edie, if you want to start, that would be great.
I'd be glad to. I'm Edie. I'm a recently retired faculty member in American Politics and Public Policy at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Oh, my.
And I'm John, and I'm basically in the same shoes. I'm a retired professor of political science and public policy at the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Wonderful. It sounds like your guys' careers are excellent background for what you're doing in your activism.
Well, we hope so. It's, I think both of us have learned a lot in our activism that we didn't know as professors.
Oh, my. That I would love to hear about that as we go along. So let's tell our audience, if you don't mind, what organization you gentlemen represent.
Well, sort of ourselves mostly. That Edie and I have co-taught a couple of courses along the way over the past 5 years. She's also been instrumental in founding some student organizations on campus. She can fill you in on that.
Okay. So what organization did you start on campus? One thing I was wondering is the verb, I've noticed that the verb found, you only say in the past tense as he found it. I've never heard people say he founds. Have you heard them say that?
Well, when you say I founded, you mean I started.
Yes.
As opposed to I found, which means I discovered.
Exactly.
So it didn't exist before. But the organization is called Turnout.
Turnout, okay.
Yeah. And it is a student organization which is dedicated to nonpartisan strategies to increase student voter registration, voter education, and voter turnout. And we work on 3 campuses of the University of Michigan, one in Ann Arbor, which is the largest of the 3, and then also U of M Flint and U of M Dearborn.
All right. So you started this organization, or did some students start this? How did that go?
Well, I started it. I was back in 2017 when I first learned about the low levels of student engagement in the political process on our campus and on many campuses across the country. And I recruited some students to join me, and then the students have really taken over leadership, and I've become their faculty advisor now. So they became recognized as an official student organization, and the leaders have learned a lot, and they get engaged, and they graduate, and then we have new students come into those roles.
All right. So kindly tell us why you think student voter turnout is low.
Well, Andrew, there are many reasons, and so one of them is that they move a lot.
Okay.
And they don't always know that they need to update their voter registration. They also have the right to vote at home or at their campus address, but most of them don't know that. And then there are a variety of other reasons, which have to do with the rules and laws of the state, which all vary. Of course, at the University of Michigan, we have students from all 50 states. So when we help them with their understand how they go about voting, it's different depending on where they choose to vote, and that's complicated.
Sure.
They come to Ann Arbor from other places where the voting rules are just completely different, and they don't realize that, and they need to learn what the voting rules are for the place where they plan to vote. So
do you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I could go on about this.
Well, I think one of the other reasons why they don't vote is they don't quite get around to it. The most recent election in Michigan, 1,500 approximately U of M students registered on election day because they can. They also could have registered, online in 5 minutes months ago. So it's something they intended to do, and they could always put it off till tomorrow. And they got to election day, and tomorrow wasn't going to work, so they stood in line for hours. And what turned out to be a pretty cold evening. And I think it's, they're busy, and they have other things that have deadlines today or tomorrow, and this one gets put off. But in the end, at least 1,500 of them showed up and registered and cast their ballots on election day.
It sounds like Michigan at least has one good rule that they let people sign up on election day. Are there other rules in Michigan that make it more difficult for students to vote? Is it systemic rules that stand in the way?
Yes, there are some systemic rules that stand in the way. One is that Michigan says that for the 2 weeks before the election, the only place you can register, you can't register online anymore. The only place you can register is at the city clerk's office.
Okay.
And they have to provide proof of residency, which a lot of students don't know about and don't understand how they can provide that. So there are some rules that have complicated students' ability to do that. If they could register online right up to and including election day, that would be a lot better for them.
Okay. So your organization would like to change that part where they can, in Michigan at least, where they can register up to election day online.
That would be a big help.
It would be. The question is whether that would burden local clerks and Secretary of State's office at a time when they're kind of frantic with, things that are happening on election day. Well, I think it would make it easier that the voters in Michigan this time passed a proposition which in the future will give 9 days of early voting to students so they can sashay in a week early and cast a vote. That will help. That in fact, in the last two budget ballot proposals that passed, opened up, a lot of opportunities for students and addressed a whole lot of problems that had been there before. So I think that the state is making it easier, but there still will probably be the people who wait too long. But I think Michigan is among the leading states in trying to make it possible for students to vote, that they can walk into the clerk's office and vote. They can get no reason absentee ballots. They can put them in drop boxes or mail them back. It's actually pretty easy if you know what the rules are and you get organized.
Right. There is another thing they could do, and that is we have automatic voter registration, which means that when you get your driver's license, you can register to vote unless you say, no, I don't want to. But what we don't have is pre-registration, which, say, California has. They allow young people at age 16 to register to vote, even though the registration doesn't become effective until they turn 18 when they're eligible to vote. So what happens here is that a lot of students go get their driver's license at age 16 and they can't take advantage of the automatic registration. And that's unfortunate as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I'm not familiar with that from any state where I lived in, but that sounds like a good idea. That would increase the turnout. So here's a question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it does seem to help in those places that have implemented it, yes.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned early voting. So do you see a correlation between when the states allow early voting, that increases voter turnout?
Yeah, I think it will. I don't know by how much. I mean, other states have had this for a while. There's probably data on that. But it means that, people can vote on a schedule that works for them rather than a particular day where they might have been scheduled to work, or, kids are out of school or somebody's sick, they don't make it to the polls. This allows you to get an early start, and if things get in the way, you still got some days later you can go back and vote. So I think it really, relieves voters of a sense that there's only, one day you can make this happen. And
sure.
Absentee ballots do the same thing.
So why do people object to early voting? What's their problem with it?
You'd have to ask the people who object to it. There's this sense of, it makes it easier to, cast fraudulent votes or harvest votes.
Okay.
I don't see any problems with it at all. And I don't know that there's evidence of the various allegations that say that it makes it harder.
Actually, the early voting requires the clerks to have the offices staffed and open for those 9 days, which they don't have to do when you don't have early voting. But
I see.
And those, these rules that get passed to enable more voting need to be accompanied by the budget for the clerks in the localities so that they can actually implement them.
Sure, makes sense. So some of the clerks might be resistant if they're going to have to overwork those periods of time without the adequate staff.
I don't think they mind the work. They just need the budget to pay the staff.
Okay.
And if you're going to have drop boxes in various places, you got to buy and install the drop boxes. So there are costs that come with, making it easier and more flexible for voters. And I think the clerks would be happy to do this if somebody covers the costs.
Also, in regard to voter turnout, I'm thinking of how it will benefit or disadvantage certain people. I've heard before people say when the people are in power, it's not in their best interest to have big turnout. For example, if they see an election where there's huge turnout, it's usually because they're turning out for not the incumbent, but some new person. And since we're alternative parties here, that would be something we'd like to see. If there's an election that people didn't care about for a number of years and all of a sudden there's a huge turnout, that could be beneficial to our side. So do you see that certain people are opposed to voter turnout and may, whether directly or indirectly or subtly, suppress voting because they don't want their power to be threatened?
Well, I'm not sure they feel threatened by alternative parties. I think their principal threat is the other major party. And they may be concerned that, some of these reforms will favor the other party rather than theirs. But I think for the most part, the vote totals for the minor parties are small enough, and the campaigns, don't have enough money to really get the word out. So I don't think, I have never been in the war room for one of these parties to know if they really care about what happens with the Natural Rights Party or the Working Class Party. But my guess is they don't spend more than a minute thinking about it.
Okay.
Most of the voter suppression activity, that is, efforts to make it difficult for people to vote, have to do with the different effects that result from those rules for different categories of people. Okay. So, for example, working people, poor people don't have, and people, for example, on Native American reservations who have to travel long distances sometimes to get to the polls, they may vote in a particular way, and the other party is not interested in making it too easy for them to vote.
Sure.
So you see charges of racial voting suppression, of young people voting suppression, of indigenous population voting suppression, and so forth. People who are in privileged categories don't have to worry about whether they leave work and go vote in the middle of the day, but people who have to work on the line can't just do that.
Sure. Some people talk about one reform being giving people off of a day for voting. So make maybe 1 or 2 days that they get to take, everyone is off of work. I've heard people talk about other countries that do that where they make voting mandatory and thus everyone has to give off of work. Does your organization or do you gentlemen, do you two support that, or how do you see that? Do you see that as helpful?
Well, my students are very enthusiastic about the idea of having election day off because they found for some students who were in line, for example, that they missed exams or that they were up so late that the next day they were kind of bleary and not very sharp for their exam. And there are universities that do give the day off. And there are universities, most of them do not. So there is a movement, I think, nationally to try to encourage universities to give the day off, or even to make Election Day a national holiday. There is some discussion about that, but I don't know how much traction it's getting.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't either. And it might, in the case of students, it says, "Hey, it's a 4-day weekend," and they will therefore think, "Well, I'll just cast my vote before that," and then they don't get around to it, but they still have made plans to be away for the weekend. So I don't
has potential.
know.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You're saying you don't think what?
So I'm not sure that I think it's not near the top of my list of things to do.
Okay.
In terms of there's a cost to it. That is, if people are getting a holiday, whatever they would be doing at work that day isn't going to get done. So I think there are other ways to encourage it. It's not clear to me that giving somebody the day off and calling it an Election Day holiday is going to influence whether they vote or not that much.
Okay.
Again, it may be that if that particular day, their child is sick and schools are closed, well, they stay home. They don't haul a sick child to the polling place. So, there may be evidence on it. If somebody's gathered it, I'm not familiar with it, but I think we have an awful lot of holidays as it is, and there are plenty of people who think we've got enough, and that there are other ways to make this happen. And I think, the work that Turnout has done on the Michigan campus has moved turnout a lot, from 14% in 2014 to, 40-some percent, maybe higher this year. So I think there are things that work, and I'd prefer to stick to those, I think.
Okay, fair enough. So what have you done that has increased the voter turnout so dramatically? What activities have you done to serve those ends?
Well, we have put out a lot of information about how to vote.
Okay.
We have held events where we have helped register students and explain their choices. We provide stamps and envelopes for those who need to mail in their registrations because students typically don't have stamps or envelopes. We explain how important it is that the signatures that they use on their ballots be the same signature they use on their registration, or their ballot might be thrown out. So there are a lot of things that we do to cover that. We also had parties at the polls. We provided free donuts and cider on a cool day, and we had some music going, and it can be festive and make it fun. I think one of the biggest obstacles to voting has to do with something that my colleague John knows a lot about, and that is the gerrymandering that exists in so many states, and the fact that so many districts are not competitive to begin with, and so people don't think their vote really will matter. And one of the important things that happened in Michigan is that we passed an amendment to our state constitution to establish an independent commission to draw the district lines after the last census. And that, commission was interested in drawing districts that would serve voters' interests and not so much the interests of the elected officials. But John knows a lot more about this than I do.
And I think that mattered a lot this time. That the districts that were drawn for congressional districts, state senate, state house, were much more balanced than they had been previous to decades. The Republican Party had gerrymandered things pretty badly. There was a sense this time that, that citizens had taken control of the process, and they produced a fair number of districts that were toss-ups or close to it. There were still districts that were solidly Democratic and solidly Republican, because there are parts of Michigan where it's hard to find any kind of partisan balance there. But it really mattered, and it generated more candidates. It generated more good candidates. And I think, it made people think, okay, on those races, the citizens are in control, and, the parties are dictating less what happens. And I think Michigan is now, among the leading states in having done that and done it well. And there are, 26 states or something like that allow citizen petitions to put things like this on the ballot. And I think we're going to see a growing number pursue this kind of thing. It gives people a sense that election results are actually something that citizens can have a real impact on.
Sure. In regard to the donut and cider idea, that's a good idea. Did you need a permit to do that?
Well, we needed a permit to be in the space from the university. We needed a permit. But no, in Michigan it is perfectly legal to provide food and drink and blankets, for that matter, to old students in the middle of the night when they're standing in line. It isn't similarly possible to do that just everywhere. It depends on what the state rules are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea.
That have prohibited people from handing out water to people standing in long lines and things like that. But in Michigan, you're pretty much free to do that as long as you know what the specific rules are.
By the way, you have to give it to anybody, not just voters. Anybody who comes by.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're glad to do that.
Sure. Interesting. So has anybody objected to your organization, what you've done? Have they made any arguments against this? It doesn't sound like people would, but you never know. So has anybody?
Well, not within my hearing, no.
Yeah. No, there may be people who, wish the organization went away, but they're not very vocal about that because it'd be tough to make that argument in a way that didn't sound deeply partisan.
Sure.
We don't care how people vote. We're just encouraging them to vote. So we are very careful about remaining outside of the ideological divisions of the parties.
Yeah. But
sure.
One of the other things that we did to encourage students to vote was to do a little competition among the Big Ten universities. That Edie got hold of the president of the University of Michigan and said, how would you like to sign on to rally the Big Ten schools to have a little competition on turnout? And within a week, everybody had signed up. So that sense of, we want our turnout rate to be higher than Michigan State or Ohio State in our particular case. Probably between Wisconsin and Minnesota, they had a similar kind of thing. And so we've done that before with student blood donation drives. Will Ohio State get more blood donors than the University of Michigan? And I think it was a way to publicize it, to declare somebody to be a winner. And it gave you something to organize around on campus.
Sure.
Register now and vote because, we want to beat Ohio State.
I take it, is student government helpful in this regard? When I was in student government in college, that was one thing that they were focused on was getting people to vote. So I would think they'd be receptive. Have they been receptive?
Yes, they've been very receptive. Yeah. They've been a good partner. They have helped host certain events, and they have used their social media to help get the word out to students. We run an initiative called 10 Tuesdays where we provide information every week on a Tuesday of where students should be in terms of preparing to vote if they're going to be ready and successful by Election Day. And they sent those all out on their social media platforms.
Sure.
Yep. And we also got the clerk in Ann Arbor to open up 2 auxiliary clerk's offices on campus. One in the Art Museum and one on North Campus in the Duderstadt Library. And a couple of faculty members from the School of Art designed, amazingly effective polling places and places for students to go and get informed and register to vote. And that proved very popular and was helped by the fact that, they had free donuts outside on a couple of occasions. And so it made it easy to find a place on campus where you used to going and often went by, and it eliminated the need to walk downtown to the clerk's office. And so I think it generated some real energy. Certainly I was impressed with the work that they did.
Sure. So how can our listeners out there support your organization?
Well, if they want to contact us, we're delighted to benefit from their financial support. We've even had people send us stamps and things like that we need so that we don't have to fund them. But we also are very interested in helping other schools implement some of these same strategies. And if people are interested, we are always willing to share whatever materials we have and, share with them what we know about what works and what doesn't work, and learn from them, these other campuses and other places, what works on their campuses, because we're constantly trying to improve what we do.
Sure.
So schools are in touch with one another, but
yes.
There's always more that can be done, because in case of Michigan, you're spread all over the state. It's hard to get people together, so you can do it online. But, I think that sense if somebody stumbles onto what they think is a great idea, sharing it, the structure is there, but we need more opportunities to make sure that people can learn from what works elsewhere and give it a try on their campus.
Sure. So if people do want to support you, how will they get in touch with you? Should they go to your website, or how should they get in touch with you?
Well, that's the best way, is to go to the University of Michigan and look up Turnout. It's T-U-T. It's 3 words the way we do it. Turn up, Turnout. And we have a website, and they can contact us through that as well.
Okay, great.
You contacted us through our hotline, which is voteredge.com at umich.edu. And we were doing a 24-hour turnaround of answers to questions posed by students, faculty, or staff to us, or parents, about voting during the lead up to the election.
Sounds good. All right. So they can get in touch with you by the website at looking through at University of Michigan Turnout.
That's the key. Yes.
All right. Excellent. So thank you, Edie, and thank you, John, for coming on the podcast today and talking about your organization and your drive to increase voter turnout among youth.
You're very welcome.
Yep. Thank you, Andrew.
It's good to have an opportunity to spread the word.
Yep.
Sure thing. That's what we're here for. So I wish you all the best in your organization and all your other personal and professional endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.